this morning, allow me to focus on interviews that have been taking place this entire week. The Judicial Service Commission on Thursday completed the interviewing of candidates shortlisted for the position of Chief Justice. 12 out of the 16 candidates were interviewed for the post left vacant following the retirement of former Deputy Chief Justice Kalpana Rawal. Among those interviewed are judges Lydia Chode, Philomena Mwilu, Agnes Murgor, Roslyn Namboye, Pamela Mwikali Tutui, Joyce Miguda Majiwa, Wanjiru Karanja as well. Judge Pauline Nyamwea and lawyer Surinda Kapila, however, pulled out of the race, while lawyer Isaac Rutenberg was disqualified yesterday on the basis of experience. So that is a conversation we're having this morning in studio with two gentlemen. So one, on my immediate right, I have Jesse Oduor and, of course, a familiar face on this show, Duncan Okach, both advocates of the High Court. Gentlemen, thank you for speaking to us on News Center this morning. Duncan, let me start with you. What are your thoughts on the whole process, the whole interviewing process for DCJ?
Thank you, Linda. My opinion on that particular issue is that the interviews kind of delved into specific issues across the board. There are specific issues in terms of questions which were lodged towards this particular interviewees, which cuts across the board and would actually be a good pedestal in terms of measuring their competency and measuring the metal that they are made of, as opposed to what we saw in as far as the Chief Justice's interviews were concerned. You saw that different diverse questions were actually channeled towards these particular interviewees, and as such it could not be easy to actually juxtapose these particular questions and award the points on these particular responses for specific questions.
Jesse?
I think the Judicial Service commissioners did a good job with regard to the questions that were asked to the candidates. You realize that the Deputy Chief Justice is going to be the Vice President of the Supreme Court and the Deputy of the Judiciary as a whole. It's a very integral and important position. The questions, as Okach says, were kind of different from what the Chief Justice was asked.
How different? How different? That is what I want to know.
The difference comes in the sense that the Deputy Chief Justice plays a second fiddle to the Chief Justice.
Yes.
And therefore, with that mere fact alone, you want to get somebody who must agree to be led. You're not going to take over and be over and above your boss.
Okay.
Yes.
Duncan, he said the questions were a little bit different from the questions that were being asked to the Chief Justice candidates. How different were they?
Linda,
more specific?
I would actually attribute that maybe to the fact that a majority of the interviewees were ladies. And if you look at the commissioners, the most antagonistic, you'll find that they are gentlemen. I would want to believe that that may have played a role.
Really?
We must be. I'm realistic because you will see the questions that were posed, as opposed to the nominees for Chief Justice, where the gloves were off. At this particular point, there was no confrontation whatsoever.
True.
And actually, it just went so soft and so cool that you could not actually have any radical views from these particular interviewees. However, the other aspect to it will be that majority of them were sitting judges of the High Court, Court of Appeal, and maybe one from the Magistrates Court. So maybe that is why it will be easier to focus on their performance, on their views in terms of the ills that face the judiciary, and on what they will bring in terms of transformation. And like what my fellow learned colleague has indicated, in terms of how that will synchronize with the person that we already expect to be appointed as the next Chief Justice.
I'll buy the second explanation. I will absolutely not buy the first explanation. All right, Jesse.
Yeah.
Rutenberg's candidacy was actually thrown out yesterday on the basis of experience.
Yeah.
And he tried to explain why he thought he was experienced, putting in mind that I think he's been practicing for a while, but the requirement as per the law is, I believe, 15 years.
Yes.
Let's talk about this experiencing, because he's not the first individual who's raising the issue of experience. Do you think this should be relooked at?
No, I think it shouldn't be relooked at, because you are looking at a position that is very senior in the judiciary. And in the event that the Chief Justice is not there, then the Deputy Chief Justice assumes the role of the Chief Justice. And then that 15 period is not something that people sat and just decided that let's do 15, like any other profession. Because you're going to preside over very important matters, including the presidential election. We need somebody who has the necessary experience. If it was open up, then it means that somebody will come out of law school and then apply for that position. Really, at that particular point, you don't even know where the law comes and where it goes to.
Law I know. Maybe I may have practiced for 3 years, but maybe I understand the law.
Yeah, you can understand the law. We also understand the law, but then Okach will tell you right now, we understand the law. We've won several big cases, but we can't be judges. You have to have a practice for 10 years to be a judge. And therefore, when you're going for Chief Justice and CJ now, the bar is a little bit higher again. That's when 15 years comes in.
Duncan Rutenberg said it doesn't matter how long you've been practicing. The most important thing is how you interpret the law.
Ideally, that would have been a good response if the question that was being asked is representing a client in court or being appointed into a certain commission, which does not have a time frame limit in law or in the Constitution. However, he had a chance if he was actually in Kenya when we were actually crafting our new constitution. We gave our views, and the framers of the constitution, in their wisdom, as my learned colleague has indicated, deemed it fit that 15 years is the requisite period. Therefore, and that is the question that I always pose, if as an applicant I go through this particular application and it's very clear that I must have a prerequisite of 15 years experience, it is there. I'm not going to this interview to start negotiating on reducing the qualification. That you start on a wrong pedestal, and in actual sense people say you are not even fit to be a magistrate of the lower court, basically because you cannot even understand and interpret an application alone.
Just to add that.
Yeah. And Duncan, be nice. Okay.
No, I like he's playing the devil's advocate, which is nice. Yeah. Now, when the position of Deputy Chief Justice was advertised, it was clear the way Duncan puts it, 15 years threshold. Now, you want to hold this position to interpret laws and you can't appreciate that fact, then we already start asking ourselves the question, really, do you even appreciate, do you even understand what the law says? That is something that is very clear in the Constitution. And then just to add that, the Constitution clearly puts out that more than one gender should not hold more than 2/3 of a leadership.
Rule, yeah.
This was the only gentleman who applied for that DCJ position. We already have a DCJ nominee who is a man, so automatically that locked him out.
And it's very interesting you pick out that issue, because I know two candidates, actually, Surinda Kapila and Pauline Nyamweya, opted out. So Pauline said the CJ nominee comes from her region, and Surinda didn't give any reasons. What are your thoughts on the fact that Pauline actually opted out just because the CJ nominee comes from the same region that she does?
I think that was a very honorable thing to do. And then I think she was alive to the fact that the Constitution gives the balancing of ethnic and diversity in the country, and the region on balancing too. So I think it was more so of being practical and real, that if the DCJ comes from my county, automatically I'm not going to
But what if the DCJ comes from my county, but then I'm also the most qualified of this other lot? What happens?
Now, you realize that sometimes public interest overrides individual interest, then that one works against you.
Duncan?
I agree totally with my learned colleague on that. That was an honorable position and decision from the Lady Justice. And true to the fact, it will not sit well with other Kenyans in as far as having a Chief Justice and a Deputy Chief Justice from one community. And you know, they play the same roles. If the Chief Justice is not there today, the Deputy Chief Justice can play all the roles that the Chief Justice can play. But having said that, I have said in this show before that particular position will not also augur well with the institutional architectural designs of our Constitution and in terms of empowerment of different organs. The decision she took will presuppose that Justice Maraga has already been appointed a Chief Justice. What will that say of the process of approval by Parliament? To her, the Parliament will actually then be a rubber stamping body, as opposed to a vetting body which would, in its in the powers that it has been given, approve or disapprove. If they disapprove, it means we must go back to the process from start. What then will happen to our application? The interviews have already been conducted and all that. Therefore, if you respect these particular provisions and architectural designs, you must what I would have expected from her is she will subject herself to an interview, she will answer the questions in her witty nature, but after all, she will put a right and say that if this particular person, by the time you are coming up with this particular decision, and automatically it will be because Parliament is sitting next week, if he actually is approved by Parliament, the President has no choice. Therefore, I will not feel comfortable being nominated to be vetted for this particular seat.
Yeah. Jesse?
I think the Lady Justice was just being real and alive to the political facts in this country.
But Duncan says it's almost like saying Parliament is like a rubber stamping.
Which automatically, let's be realistic, guys. Yeah. Parliament rubber stamps. The moment their political supremos say yes, say do, you're doing this. You realize both the coalitions of the two coalitions, the two major coalitions in Parliament, their leaders have already said we endorse Justice Maraga for this job.
Okay.
So you don't expect the MPs to go and do something else. They always toe the line, even when it's to their detriment. The moment the bosses say we are going this way, they do that.
They do that.
Yeah.
Duncan is on his own, eh?
I disagree. He's on his own. And, I can tell you, we learned from history, and there was a point where Miller, the advocate, was appointed, I think, to be either the Attorney General or I think it was the DPP, Deputy Director of Public Prosecutions. He actually didn't sail through, despite that particular nomination, in Parliament, and because of other issues, allegations in terms of his marital affairs. That alone was enough for Parliament to disapprove. If this was the same, and we don't know, the Parliament has already invited memorandums and all that from the public.
Yes, yeah.
Jesse may not know that there may be something akin to that, or something that parliamentarians may say, no, in our view, this is not the right person. And that's what we are saying. Politically, there are those other issues. But again, it will be very unfair to say that parliamentarians are like children of these particular people, that if they say left, it's right, and they don't have brains. I can tell you for a fact, that's why we have a lot of disagreements within parties. Yeah. And you'll continue seeing them in terms of principalities.
And probably that's why they even ask for public participation
exactly.
Now as they go towards the vetting process. Jesse, tell me, what kind of a DCJ are you looking forward to?
With regard to DCJ, we're going to get somebody who meets the bill, somebody who is going to bring in new ideas into the judiciary. You realize we can't really write so much about the two deputy chief justices who have been around after the new constitution.
What do you mean you can't write much about them?
You realize how Nancy Baraza went, and then
yes,
now
you're making very serious allegations.
I'm not making very. Okay. These are public. These are public knowledge issues that Kenyans know. The way she exited office wasn't so honorable. Yeah. The same way the outgoing deputy chief justice went. So we need somebody to bring at least some integrity and decorum into that office. Okay. Somebody who is going to. The judiciary is going to look up to, and the profession is going to respect and look up to. And also somebody who is going to work well with the Chief Justice. And at least we need a very sober Supreme Court. Right now, if the last decision that the Supreme Court made is anything to go by, then it means that court is divided. We need somebody who's going to unify the judges, somebody who's going to make the apex court of this land speak with one voice.
Duncan, apart from a unifying factor, what else are you looking for?
We want someone who can work seamlessly with the nominee if he actually is approved, and that will actually treat the ills that be faced the previous CJ and the DCJ. We want someone who will add value in terms of philosophical and legal understanding of the law. Because we have many decisions of this particular court where lawyers have criticized and said that either this court is afraid to do the honorable thing, or either this court is influenced by external forces. Want someone who will bring that perception that this court is a court of law, guided by law and law alone, as opposed to what we have seen in the past, whereby you have judges differing on different issues, which may touch on themselves or may touch on the general public. We have other decisions like the ones that Smoking Wanjala was involved in as far as the gender issues are concerned constitutionally, and people are saying they were afraid to actually say it as it is, that if Parliament does not comply with that, then Parliament has no business being around. We want people who can take it that far. However, and unfortunately, and you may not also agree with me, is that what these applicants may have kind of thought, and that is with all due respect to them, is that people are thinking they are going to be flower girls. They are going to be just assistants. No, in my view, whoever ascends to this particular position should act as if that person is the CJ, in authority, in command, and in giving guidance to the entire judiciary. In actual sense, this is the deputy president of the entire judiciary.
Okay. Listen, just before we wrap this up, at some point I remember there was John Haminwa who stormed out of court very upset, and he said there were cartels in the judiciary. The Chief Justice, Deputy Chief Justice, and of course the additional judge of the Supreme Court, if there's one thing you expect them to fix, what would that be in the judiciary?
The first thing I'll expect the new team to do is actually bring back the confidence of Kenyans and the profession back to the Supreme Court. This is being alive to the intrigues that has happened, where you realize the last ruling that the Supreme Court made, it was very evident that there was infighting, there was no harmony between the judges. Yeah. And therefore, when you have such a scenario, then there's also that trickle-down effect. These are the seniors of the other judges of the Court of Appeal and High Court and other magistrates. When the top is not proper, then it speaks about the whole institution. We need somebody to fix that, and also to work on whatever the former Chief Justice Mutunga did. He tried to a large extent to reform the judiciary and also to put in some the new development that he's put place. We want them to be continued.
Duncan, in under a minute, I need to wrap this up.
You've given him 2, but I'll take the under minute. Ideally, he has wrapped up everything, because it's the issue about confidence and the issue about the reform agenda, the issue about the transformative agenda. And to me, I will take it further in terms of policing judges and ensuring that the issue of backlog is dealt with, the issue of delays are dealt with, and the issues of judges being infiltrated, whether perception or whether ideal, are dealt with. Okay. That is all.
So Duncan, I owe you a minute for the next show. So the next time you come back here, remind me of your minute. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Duncan Okach and of course Jesse Odwar, advocates of the High Court. Gentlemen, thank you for speaking to us on News Center. People, this morning we are also focusing on what's happening in Migori. You remember that story about Masi Ko, the University of Nairobi student who died, I believe, 5 years ago. The last that was heard about her is that she had been invited for a party that was organized by the then Juja Member of Parliament and now Kiambu Governor William Kabogo. And of course, there has been no pointers yet as to the suspects or indeed how she died, because government pathologist Johansen Odwar said she had multiple fractures. It was almost impossible to pick out the real cause of her death. So there's an inquest verdict that is supposed to be delivered today in Migori. Our Rashid Ronald is keeping an eye on it for us. But this morning we are asking you if you think justice will be done in the Masi Ko case. Do you think justice will be done in the Masi Ko case? Let us know.